This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Get business done with the new American Express Graphite Business Cash Unlimited card. With unlimited 2% cash back on all eligible purchases, unlimited 5% cash back on flights and prepaid hotels booked through American Express Travel Online, and a flexible spending capacity that can grow with your business, you'll have the confidence to keep building. Apply today and earn a welcome offer of $1,500 cash back after you spend $50,000 in qualifying purchases on your new card within the first 6 months of card membership. Terms apply. Learn more at go.amex/graphite.
You're listening to the Animation Addicts Podcast, episode 371, Minions and Monsters, a love letter to classic cinema.
Welcome to the Animation Addicts Podcast with the Rotoscopers, the #1 place to get your animation fix with animation addicts just like you. Each episode, we dive into the wonderful world of animation featuring Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar, and everything in between. From hilarious discussions and movie reviews to interviews with industry insiders, this show's mission is to brighten your day through our love of animation. So hop on your nerdy couch, grab some snacks, and get ready to hang out with your animation besties because it's time to dive into today's episode.
Hey there, Animation Addicts. I'm your host, Morgan Stradling, and I am joined by a very special co-host. You might have heard him on a previous episode of the Animation Addicts Podcast. I'm joined today by film critic and author Nick Spake.
Morgan, great to be back.
Yes, we saw each other last night at the screening of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. So it was a good time. If you are a patron, stay tuned. We have a little discussion, mini review at the end of this episode for the patrons where we talk about our thoughts on that. So that was a fun one. But today we are going to be talking about Minions and Monsters. Now this came out about two weeks ago. I'm still excited to talk about it and excited to bring Nick on. So Nick, before we get started, what have you been up to?
Well, I've been working on my site cartooncontender.com where we cover animation and awards year-round, and we also recently launched the Cartoon Contender YouTube page, where we'll be doing video reviews, essays, predictions, and so on. And my books, Bright and Shiny, A History of Animation at Award Shows, volumes 1 through 3, are also on sale. They're also on ebook now, and right now I'm also working on the audiobook.
Nice. Very busy.
Yep, very busy, yet still have time to go to the movies.
Of course, always. Yeah, so I'll include links to all of those in the show notes for everyone, and in addition to the previous episode that we did. Yeah, since we spoke last year, the 3rd volume has come out.
Yep, It's officially out.
Yeah.
I'm all the way caught up to when Flo won, and I guess maybe years from now I'll do another where K-pop Demon Hunters wins and so on.
Yeah. So you have some breathing room to take some time between the next installment, but maybe write it along the way, right? Alrighty. So before we get started, I wanted to do a fun little segment. Actually, I'm not going to show you these questions, but listeners of the podcast know that we have a segment called Catch and Fire. It's a quick rapid fire Q&A to get to know our guests. And so with that, are you ready, Nick?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Well then, how about a quick round of catch and fire?
Catch and fire? You mean me?
You're the only one with enough courage.
All right. What is the first animated film you remember seeing?
In the theater, Nightmare Before Christmas.
Favorite cartoon growing up?
Favorite cartoon? Probably Looney Tunes, but then it became The Simpsons once I was allowed to watch that, which when I was about 8, probably.
Nice. Favorite animated movie?
Favorite animated movie, Beauty and the Beast.
I'm liking your choices. Favorite animator or artist?
Let's see, that's a tough one, but I'd probably have to say Chuck Jones.
Classic animation, like traditional animation, or CGI?
I'd go with classical, but both have their merits.
Favorite animation studio?
Studio Ghibli has no misses, so I think I gotta go with that.
Disney or Pixar?
Right now, Pixar. Overall, I think Disney's had more of an impact.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this one, but Laika or Studio Ghibli?
I gotta say Studio Ghibli, but give them a few more decades, maybe they'll get on that level.
Songs or no songs?
Depends on how good the song is. I mean, if it's Disney, songs. Any other studio, it's going to be very hit and miss.
Heroes or villains?
Villains all the way.
People or anthropomorphic?
Anthropomorphic.
Summer releases or winter releases?
I prefer a nice winter release to end the year.
Nice. Stitch or Tinkerbell?
Stitch.
And who would win in a fight, King Fergus or Stoic the Vast?
I'm going to go with Stoic.
And this is the most important final question that we have. This is a real humdinger, but would you rather watch Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 or Return of Jafar?
You know, I've never seen Hunchback 2, so I think I'm going to say that just so I can finally say that I've seen it, if only to see if it's as bad as people say.
When you do, report back.
Well, it is on Disney Plus, so I guess I could.
Nice. All right, thanks for this rapid fire. Oh, we have one last. This is one that got added, but what is your I Want song?
I'm going to go with Jack's Lament from Nightmare Before Christmas.
Nice. So starting with Nightmare Before Christmas and bookending it with Nightmare Before Christmas. Awesome.
You brought it full circle.
Alrighty, so we are jumping into this episode with Minions and Monsters. So we're excited to talk about this film. Before we get started, let's set the stage. So the film is titled Minions and Monsters. It was released July 1st, 2026, directed by Pierre Coffin, written by Brian Lynch and Pierre Coffin, produced by Chris Meldandri and Bill Ryan. The studio is Illumination and Universal Pictures. Budget $85 million, and as of recording, it has done $281.1 million. So, where do you want to kick off this discussion about Minions and Monsters?
Well, I guess we can just both go into our general opinions and go from there.
Okay, take it away.
Yeah, sure. For me, if you asked me which Illumination movie I was most excited to see this year, it easily would have been the Super Mario Galaxy movie. That's the one that really had an appealing trailer. It was based on one of my favorite games. And when it came out, I liked it enough, you know. It was basically more of what we got in the previous film, except it doubled down on the Easter eggs, which I do think is going to get a little tired if that's all we get by the time we get to the third Mario movie. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing it'll probably be Mario Odyssey. And if you told me that I would prefer Minions and Monsters, I'd find it questionable. And if you told me that the film was going to be a love letter to cinema, I'd say, what yellow Kool-Aid have you been drinking? But from the opening shot of this movie, not even the opening shot, but just the Universal logo, when it rewinds backwards to one of the original Universal logos, and we get the black and white minions harkening back to classic Disney and Fleischer shorts, I was immediately won over, telling that this wasn't just going to be another Minions movie or another Despicable Me movie. And it became clear what it was going for as we got several throwbacks to classic cinema. And the way that it approaches cinema is also just very clever. It's reminiscent of Singin' in the Rain or even more recent films like Babylon. And yeah. And it really took me back to when I was a kid watching the original Looney Tunes or something like Tiny Toon Adventures, specifically the episodes that would approach how movies are made or how cartoons were made. And I think that's going to be the case for a lot of the younger people in the audience. They may not understand certain references to people like Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, or Buster Keaton, all of whom are referenced within one scene, but it will get them thinking about what goes on behind the scenes of movies, whether it's animated or live action. And I think this could very well be the starting point for them to discover their just love for cinema and explore how these movies get off the ground, what and explore even the history of cinema. And while they're sure to discover other films that will, broaden their horizon and teach them more, this could very well be the starting point.
Yeah, I thought that like the same things, from the very beginning, the very first logos, and we have the Fleischer, rubber hose arms. It's like, okay, they get this. They are not just phoning this in. It's going to be something that they're going to pay homage to it. It's going to be a love letter to cinema and classic cinema in this golden age. And I felt that they understood the assignment, to use the modern term, and they executed very, very well. You have what I loved is you have the traditional brothers studio heads, right? Warner Brothers and the Disney Brothers. And then, we get a version of that here. And I just liked what they were able to take some of these tropes and things from history, as well as the actual films from those eras as well, and just play on them and weave the minions into them, where they're these superstars in their own right in the silent era. And then once the talkies come around, they do not translate very well. Literally, you can't translate what they're saying, and they struggle to make that career jump. So I thought it was just very clever and fun, and what a really neat premise. And I feel like the first 30 minutes, 45 minutes of this film is excellent and done so well. And then once we hit the monster section, we kind of leave Hollywood behind and we're going in a different direction. And was less exciting to me as we ventured into that part, because they're saying, okay, well, we can't speak anymore. Or when we speak, it's not working well and we're losing jobs. So let's do a good old fashioned monster movie. How are we going to get monsters? Well, hey, they have access to a spell book from one of their former masters, and they're able to summon a few monsters, which then they realize real quick may not have allegiance to them, and it doesn't quite work out the way that they're hoping. So.
Yeah, well, not that quickly, but you're right that I would say that the first half of the movie is stronger than the second half, where the monsters and questions do come. Because for the first half of this movie, I was thinking that it really should have been called Minions Go Hollywood, which was more reflective of what the movie was. And then when the monsters come, it does become a more standard Minions movie. Not necessarily a bad one. I do think it's more focused than something like Despicable Me 4, which basically went from one thing to another without any real direction. And this one does, to its credit, pick an avenue and stick to it. For the first half, it is parodying Hollywood. For the second half, it is mainly sticking to the monster stuff. And then they do manage to tie it back in during the third act, especially with what is admittedly, a touching message about experiencing a movie in the theater. But you're right that the least interesting part of Minions and Monsters are the monsters. And I don't think that necessarily had to be the case. I think one of the problems is that the monsters themselves, outside of the one voiced by Trey Parker, who is pretty funny, it's fun having a little Cthulhu running around, almost reminiscent of that one South Park episode where Cartman summons Cthulhu. The other monsters, voiced by Bobby Moynihan, and I forget who voices the other one, but they're very standard monsters that you would expect. And I feel like you could have done more with them, or even with their designs. You could have gone back to the Willis O'Brien movies, have one of them be like King Kong, and we have one monster who shows up who's ultimately like the Blob, who's cool, but she doesn't appear until the climax. I feel like even the Cyclops at the very beginning, I thought had a more interesting design, and it would have been fun if maybe they brought something like that back, some throwbacks to Clash of the Titans, something like that. So, while I don't think that the second half ruins it in any case, it is where the film goes from being a potentially all-timer in this franchise to being maybe third all around. If I had to rank all of these movies, I'd probably go with the original Despicable Me, followed by the second one, then this one. Although there's a pretty wide gap between this one, and I'd say maybe after that would be Despicable Me 3 or the first Minions, but yeah.
Yeah, like you mentioned at the very beginning, we have this scene where, minions do what minions do, and they're always looking for a new big bad boss to serve. And so we see them as they're kind of moving throughout these various villains that have their inevitable demise, and so they have to move to someone else. And the minions may or may not have a part in the downfall of some of these. And I like what you said about the Cyclops, because I thought the Cyclops was such a fun segment in this very beginning. I really liked what the minions were doing there. I liked the design of the Cyclops, and then we're introduced to the two, I guess the main minion in this. And what I do enjoy is that it seems every Minions movie we're not just going back to the same three. So this one we have James, Henry, Ed, and Dick. And James, Henry, Ed are the three that kind of are the trio, the buddies. James is the one who just has this love of this creativity, and he's an artist, and he's always sketching and drawing things. And Henry's just his lackey who kind of just agrees with him and is his best friend. And then Ed. He's just the funny one who can't talk. It reminds me very much of another Ed from The Lion King, who's the rounding out the trio of a group. Then we have Dick, who's kind of an antagonist, but he's more of the taskmaster, saying like, hey, get in line, what are you doing? And so we're kind of setting up this story with them at the very beginning. And I liked a lot of what they were doing at the very beginning. And so and it does pay off later, because they have one master who's a sorcerer, and they're able to get a hold of his book, which pays off later when they need to summon their own.
Yeah, and you mentioned the new characters in this one, the new minions. I think it's a nice touch that one is named James and the other is named Henry, which I believe is probably a reference to James Stewart and Henry Fonda, who were both Golden Age stars who were best friends in real life. I'm not sure if that was intentional, but it would be quite a coincidence if not.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I have a son named James, and initially when I went to the screening for this, I have 4 kids that come to the screenings, and I just it's a lot to, can I request 5 seats, So I try to okay, we're going to pick and choose. And anyways, James didn't come. He was doing something else. And then once the movie started, I was like, dang it, James would have loved this. So I owe James a date to go see the movie where his name is the star. But yeah, it's funny because the beginning of the movie is very similar to what we've seen in other Minions movies. Like they kind of all are kind of repeating the same thing, like finding the master, and how are they going to make this different? And so I appreciated the love letter to cinema and the totally different direction that they took this. We're talking about how they shift away from that, but at the same time, they kind of move to, when in the monster segment, we have more of the sci-fi homages with Dort, who is the character that's introduced, and we have a subplot of Dort and his love interest, which is a suffragette played by Zoe. How do I say her name? Deutsch?
Deutsch.
Yes.
Yeah, and for me, the stuff with Dort is what really redeemed the second half, because every time they cut back to the monsters, the movie was starting to lose me a little. But whenever Dort was on screen, I was completely won over, and he gets some of the funniest moments in the entire film, because I literally had no idea where this parody of the day the Earth stood still was going. Because you never know whether or not, at least until the very end, whether Dort is an actual robot alien or if he's just some loser who's delusional. And either way, it's just funny that he does have this romance with Zoe Deutsch. And considering that Dort is voiced by Jesse Eisenberg, it's a nice callback to when they were on screen together in Zombieland Double Tap.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought the casting was pretty good all around. And one of my favorite cameos at the very beginning, and I was laughing so hard at this, was there's a cameo at the very beginning, they kind of set it up where there is a field trip group of children who are doing a tour of a cinema history museum, all the big moments in cinema history, and they're like, oh, look at this statue of this person, and then they have George Lucas in a box who then is just stuck in this glass encasement, and then he starts talking and trying to get out. I was rolling on the floor laughing. I thought that was one of the funniest cameos and moments. Really kicked it off quite well for me. But were there any other kind of moments like that comedy wise really worked for you?
Yeah, well, first I want to say that they actually got the George Lucas to voice him. It wasn't just a caricature, which was just the cherry on top of that joke. It's funny that he's never been in a Pixar film, even though he kind of launched that studio. That's a whole history there. And yet they got him in an Illumination film. And that's probably the funniest cameo in the film, although in that same scene, they also have Orson Welles in the background encapsulated in there. And just great voice work all around. Allison Janney has a really nice role. We don't really talk as much about the voiceover work in the Minions movies, just because we're used to just having the same voiceover performance as the Minions. But this has a very stacked cast. Like Christoph Waltz gives a surprisingly really sincere performance as the director who inspires the Minions. I actually think this movie makes better use of Christoph Waltz than it does in something like any of the Bond movies, which is crazy. But in addition to being probably the most sincere Minions movie, it is also the funniest. And there were several moments in the film that just had me just howling. And one of them, This movie really pushes the boundaries of what you can do in a PG movie because in typical Minion fashion, they move on from one master to another. And part of that's because their masters keep getting killed off, usually by their own fault. And there's this one scene involving a monarch on a throne. And I guess I won't give it away here, even though it is in the trailer. But it's about as graphic as you can get in a movie that's just PG while getting away with it. And in a way, they do kind of retcon it in the end, you could argue, because you could argue that this is all just a movie within the movie. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they even have that imagery on screen is pretty insane.
Yeah, the theater gasped, and that's not really what you're expecting. And they gasped in a horrified sort of way, but then you just have to laugh afterwards. You're like, wow, they went there.
So another subtle hint, I had to look this up after, but the blob I mentioned before, her name is Irene, but it's spelled Eyrene, Irene. So yeah, that's a corny joke, but it's also a clever one.
Yeah, Irene was kind of disappointing because she was very heavily displayed and featured in a lot of the posters. Obviously, she's this big orange blob with thousands of eyeballs, and so it's very interesting imagery that they have, and then we don't really get a lot of her. So if you were really looking forward to seeing Irene in all of her glory, you get it, but it's really at the end when it's like the classic, oh no, the monster's taking over the city, we need to stop it, so which is fine. It ends up, I mean, I feel like that was kind of like the lowest point of the movie for me, is when we're having this big battle, like how are we going to stop this, and it didn't feel like there was anything really unique or different that they were able to do to make it. I mean, it's the Minions, they're being silly, but to separate it from other films that have endings like that.
Yeah, I'm wondering how you would approach that, because I guess they just figured they needed an action climax and they needed some way to resolve this. Although there is one twist that happens during the climax that I won't give away here, but it also led to one of the biggest laughs in the movie because it paid off one of the best running jokes. Again, though, the Minions aren't really the focus of that particular joke.
Right.
Do you have a favorite Minion from this?
Well, let's see. I guess I gotta go with Dick, because to an extent I can relate to him, just trying to get everyone to fall in order, and yet no one listens to me. Also, his name, they're really pushing a lot in the PG movie. You know exactly what you're getting with.
Oh, for sure. Yes. Yeah. And I thought that was funny. I felt like we kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but they had a lot of, and you get this a lot in older animated films where they have jokes that play to the adults. They play on multiple levels. They play to the adults on one level. They play to the cinephiles and the movie buffs on another, the children on one level. And like, you kind of have something in between for everyone. And so as an adult in the audience, you're not sitting there like checking your watch and being like, oh, this is so lame. It was very enjoyable through the entirety of it, because they were smart and they didn't like talk down to you or patronize you.
No, it wasn't Despicable Me 4, where they literally introduced a baby just to hook in younger viewers, and that was pretty much the only demographic they were going for.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? At a certain point, and this reminds me of the Angry Birds 3 trailer that's coming up. It's like, okay, well, we've done a few of these. Let's have some kids in the mix and all the craziness that happens there. It's like, oh, okay, we're doing this again. Yep,
and it's totally worthy of theaters, apparently, but Avatar: The Last Airbender isn't. But
man,
that's a whole other discussion.
That is. It's pretty frustrating. I will say, let's talk about the box office. So I'm going to share my screen, and we can talk about how this is done. It's surprisingly, I mean, you think for Minions, these movies just print money, right? So far, it's been a very successful franchise and, sub-franchise for Illumination. And so you're getting, and even from the beginning, if you didn't know anything about this movie, it's like, oh, Minions, and we're having monsters. Like, this is a great mashup that we're going to do. It's very clever. It has not done terribly well. So far, in basically 2 weeks since it's been opened, domestically did $111.7 million, internationally $172 million, for a cumulative total of $283.8. And you might think, okay, that's fine. But if you go to the domestic and kind of get a breakdown of where this is going, it's just kind of right along what you would expect for other films. It's like right in the median for box office. And I don't know if that necessarily was the box office weekend, this 4th of July. It's the semi-quincentennial. Maybe people aren't seeing, maybe they're doing more patriotic 4th of July sorts of things. But I feel like 4th of July comes around every year and people take advantage of holidays to see movies. So is it more of the holiday that maybe was leading to, less interest in this? Toy Story was still relatively fresh, a week out, I think, right before. Or is it maybe there's a little fatigue with this franchise?
I think there's definitely fatigue, and just to stress, the film isn't bombing really, because it only cost in the $80 million range. So by the end of its box office run, it will still be considered a success in the conventional sense. Although considering that these past few movies have made almost $1 billion, it is going to be less than Universal is used to. It's still not going to be like the live action Moana, where they spent an absurd amount of money and it's already bombing and it's showing little signs of recovering. But Minions and Monsters will at the very least be profitable by the end. But as for why the box office lower, I think there are a few things to consider. One is, like you said, franchise fatigue, because we've been getting this franchise for over a decade and a half now, and the past few movies haven't been doing as well. And even though the reviews for this one are much stronger, it's kind of going the same route as the Transformers movies, where we got 4 terrible sequels where people finally say, okay, enough is enough. But then they didn't show up to see Bumblebee, which was probably the best of the live action movies. And they also didn't show up to see Transformers 1, which is probably the best of these movies that we've done. But by this point, people were just over Transformers. I don't think people are entirely over Minions yet, although we may be getting to that point. And I think the other problem is that I don't think that Minions and Monsters is a very enticing title. It's just that we are just going to get more of what we've gotten in the past, except now monsters are in it. I think that they have played up more about what was in the first act. I don't know if it would have drawn in as many, younger kids, but I do think it would have gone in more older animation fans and fans of cinema. And when it's shown that this is going to be a different kind of Minions movie. So I think that those are the reasons why it'll probably be the lowest grossing of these films, outside of maybe the first Despicable Me, although it'll probably still come under there, but still isn't necessarily a total financial miss in this franchise. And compared to some of the other movies we've gotten this summer, it's not going to be considered one of the major successes on the financial front like Toy Story 5, but I don't think it's going to be grouped in with the bombs that came out this year like Supergirl or He-Man either.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I really appreciate Illumination is they are able to stick to a somewhat reasonable budget. I mean, that is a loaded term, it's very relative, but compared to Disney Pixar, I mean, the studios are located in different countries, so that has a big part to, but it seems Disney cannot get away from this Disney Pixar 150, 175, 200 million for just like standard for all of their films. And I believe Toy Story 5 was 250 million. It was the most expensive of the bunch. And I don't think that's paying off when you just have these explosive budgets. And we're talking Moana as well. You really have to 3x that in order to even break even. Whereas these other films that have relatively lower budgets, the stakes aren't as high. And so I think they're able to take maybe some of these risks that the other studios maybe aren't, but yeah.
Yeah, well, the one difference is that people are showing up to see Toy Story 5 even after weeks in release, and it should reach the $1 billion mark by the end of its run. So in that sense, they can justify the high budget for that film. But you also have to take into account that Toy Story, it's not just making its money at the box office, it's also inspiring plenty of merchandise. Like, I want a lily pad, even though that was kind of the message going against it. But yeah, I would totally buy myself a lily pad and also a Smarty Pants toy. So that's also where the bank is at. But for a standard Disney animated film, it's probably not going to be as justified to have that bloated of a budget.
Right.
Or even for a film that they would assume would have been $1 billion film like the live action Moana, it's not doing that great. And even if it were to reverse its box office fortunes, it's definitely not going to get to the point where they need it to be to consider profitable at this point, especially when we have Odyssey and then Spider-Man coming out in the next few weeks. And even as far as family entertainment goes, Minions and Monsters didn't have that far of a fall. It fell about 40%, which is better than what a lot of other movies have been doing, where they've been dropping like 60% in their second week. So at the very least, I think Minions and Monsters will have legs, where I don't see the live action Moana having such legs.
Yeah, I think if I were to, say, hey kids, we're going to go see a movie right now, we're going to see live action Moana or the Minions, I think people would probably choose the Minions. I mean, with Moana, it's only been around 18 months since we had Moana 2, which that is a discussion for another day, as the rush job and patched up thing that was in order to just make up for Wish, I think. But
And
Yeah,
also because they knew Dwayne Johnson couldn't play an immortal demigod. And when I say immortal, he's already looking like he's in his 50s because he is still in better shape than I'll ever be.
Yeah, he's looking a bit gaunt for what we're used to him, which is good to be healthy. But for Maui, it's a bit of a, head cock. Like, oh, okay, we got you. But it's fine. I mean, it is what it is, and maybe they'll learn lessons, maybe not. You would think after Snow White, Disney would say, okay. But this was already in production and they were gearing to go. So this was in production even before the Moana 2 was announced. But yeah, I mean, so, talking about these films that they're just like constantly, whether it's Disney live action, where they're going back to the well of these classic properties, or in Moana's case, classic, but very somewhat recent. Or we have on the Despicable Me side, or even Hotel Transylvania, where they just keep going back to these. It just seems that at a certain point, there's a lot of diminishing returns. Are they going to learn their lesson and stop, or are they just going to say maybe this next one will be the big hit that we need? I mean, I'm not saying these are bombs in the least, but you're not having perhaps the earlier box office that maybe some of the earlier films had, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't really see them stopping anytime soon, just because I don't think they really know what to do beyond going back to the well. I mean, this past summer, we've been seeing fresher voices come out with films like Obsession and Backrooms, but those films are being made explicitly for older audience and they're horror movies. With animated movies, there's more of an investment. You have to have a bigger budget for an animated movie than you may for an indie horror movie or just a horror movie in general. So they want to recoup as much cost as they can, and the only way they can think of to do that is to feed the beast with something that's familiar to audiences. Although, in some respects, we are demanding, newer content, but we're also going back to the well in other respects. Like, we have Toy Story 5, that's a big hit. Moana, that's not doing so well. Then you have Minions and Monsters, which is somewhere in the middle in terms of financial success. And I think as long as one is still bringing in the big box office, they'll write off, everything else that's failed as, a fluke, and just focus on what they believe will sell, which is nostalgia.
With
Moana, I thought it was interesting. Last year we had Lilo and Stitch, which did amazing and did over $1 billion. And so that was earlier in the summer release schedule. It was a May release. And I thought maybe Moana would have had a better chance if it were released in that similar spot, like leading into summer. We're going to see Moana, kind of beach themed, very similar to Lilo and Stitch in a way. But the problem is you have Mandalorian and Grogu, which typically those Star Wars films, they love their May release dates, but I think maybe you could have had a little more success if you would have flip-flopped those, have Mandalorian and Grogu in July and Moana. But either way, it just seems like a lot of people weren't just interested in seeing Moana. It looked kind of dingy, and this is an animation podcast. There's much to be said of animation and how it's able to, take a performance and elevate it just by the medium that it is. You see, like you're talking about The Rock, where when he's having to carry the performance himself, I mean, he really has to go all out and exaggerate in order to even come close to what Maui's able to do in animation. And it just feels flat because we're so used to, Maui bouncing and being very exaggerated.
Yeah. Well, going back to the Lilo and Stitch remake, I think two of the reasons that film did a lot better at the box office was, A, there was more of a gap period. Moana is technically under 10 years old. It will officially be 10 by the time we get to November, but it was way too soon to do a remake, where with Lilo and Stitch, it's over 20 years old, so there's more time for it to be nostalgia. But I think also with a character like Stitch in particular, when done right, he's always going to draw in audiences. For a lot of people, he's become their Jiminy Cricket. He's practically a Disney mascot in the same sense that Jiminy Cricket or even Mickey Mouse could be. And we're basically going to see anything that they have been. And to the remake of Lilo and Stitch's credit, I don't think the film itself entirely works, but it did have a great marketing campaign, taking a page from what drew audiences into the original movie, which was just having Stitch kind of go wild in the ads. And to that film's credit, Stitch's design translated well from 2D animation to 3D animation, and they brought Chris Sanders back rather than just having, a celebrity voice him. So I think they really knew with Lilo and Stitch that they just had to get Stitch right and people would show up. And that was reflected in the marketing. with the Moana remake, it became very clear from the minute that when Dwayne Johnson showed up with his fake hair and bodysuit, they weren't going to get this right, so people didn't show.
Could you see a world where the Minions, we get kind of a Minions live action? Kind of like Smurfs, but maybe not. Do you see potentially the franchise going that direction?
I think the directors have already talked about that. I do think we will inevitably get a movie like that, because I do think with Minions and Monsters, they are going to realize that they can't just do another Minions movie in the traditional sense. It needs some kind of hook, and doing the Minions in live action, I think, could actually work in the same sense that something like Roger Rabbit worked, or especially Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, which was really clever. Now, what would jump the shark is if we get Steve Carell in a bald cap doing a Bad Brew voice, and you do something like a Nickelodeon TV movie, like when they did a live action Fairly Odd Parents, then I think that could bomb. But if they're really clever and they do something that's almost like a parody, similar to Chip and Dale, and they actually come up with inventive scenarios to put the Minions in live action, then I think that could actually work. And we also have Coyote versus Acme coming out this year, which I haven't seen yet, but it looks really clever. If they could do something like that, then I think you could have the best of both worlds, but best of both worlds with live action and animation. So I could either see it being great, or I could also see it being a colossal bomb.
Yeah, I just imagine, I have this visual of Steve Carell, in a bald cap, but I don't know if he has skinny enough legs to do that. I mean, he's going to have to go on quite the diet. But yeah, I think it could work really well. I think if they're wanting to do something different, it would be something to be grounded in reality, which is something we were talking about earlier, but to just make it fun and different. And their characters, I think, would translate pretty fine to live action. Do I want live action remakes? No, I'm not advocating that we need to do a live action remake of one of the Minions movies or Despicable Me, but maybe having them, find a porthole to the real world would be interesting to me to see. Okay, now you're in the real world. What sort of villains? Oh, there's plenty of villains. Let's be real. But what kind of villains would they end up serving? And would they continue to be zany and over the top, or kind of a fish out of water?
I think they would do a mix. As for villains they would find, I think they would steer clear of something like war criminals, but they would probably find a rich CEO or something like that.
A pirate, or something very less of a explosive.
Evening. Buyer's remorse. Buy a new car? I'll be moving in. Let's get started.
Sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I bought it from Carvana.
You what?
Yeah, great price. I even have 7 days to love it or return it.
So there's no...
No buyer's remorse. More like buyer's rejoice.
I guess I'll let myself out. Congratulations. I mean it.
Buyer's rejoice. Buy your car today on Carvana. Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Of course, if they do it with the pirate, it would probably be too similar to the SpongeBob movie that just came out.
So what are your overall thoughts and rating? If we're going to rate this out of 5 stars, what would you rate Minions and Monsters in?
Well, let's see. As much as I love the first half, I will admit that the second act isn't as strong, but even then, I don't think that the second act is bad. I don't even think it's poor. It does still have some of the best laughs in the movie, especially thanks to Dort. And I do think that it does tie it all together in the end. It's a film that does really stick the landing with its message and how it ties back to cinema. So my rating overall is 4 out of 5, which is about what I gave the first 2 Despicable Me movies, whereas the other films in the franchise vary, but they were basically between 3 and maybe lower than that, but this one sits comfortably at a 4. Do I think it's going to get nominated for the Best Animated Feature Oscar? Probably not, but I do think it does show promise for where Illumination can go from here, especially since the trailer for Not Alone came out, and that actually looks like it might be a change of pace in some respects, also still going back to some of the traditional Illumination humor that we expect, but I do think that Minions and Monsters could be the beginning of something special for Illumination.
Yeah, I think Minions and Monsters shows that Illumination isn't just phoning it in. They realize they have this cash cow on their hands, and they're not going to let it sit there. I mean, it's been, 2 years since the last Despicable Me film came out, and yet we have another one 2 years later. Is it too soon? I don't necessarily think so, but, going into this film, you might think, oh, we're doing another one of these again? And it surprises and it delights. At the very beginning, the first third to half of the film is so delightful, especially for adults. I think it has something for everybody that's going to make you smile. It's going to make you laugh. It's going to make you chuckle. And you're going to have a good time. It takes, like you talked about, the second half of the film, we see a lot of storylines starting to split. New characters are introduced at that point, and it all gets wrapped up in the end very, very well. The ending is fantastic. And we didn't talk about the score. So the score was done by John Powell, and there's a funny gag in the credits where he just has this, he says, I've been trying to do this. I read an interview. He talked about he'd been trying to do this gag in some of his scores in movies for a while, and no one would take it up on him. But when his name comes on the credits, they have just this booming noise that's just like highlighting him as the star almost above anyone else involved. And I thought that was a fun moment and perfect film to do it in.
Exactly.
So going back to my thing, I would rate this 4 out of 5 stars. I went in with kind of low expectations, like, oh, these are always a fun ride, but I never need to really go back to them for any reason. Maybe Despicable Me 1 is the one that I frequently would return to, but came out just gushing over this film and wishing more people would see it and give it a chance. I think if I were to choose, the summer animated films that have come out, not too many, but I would recommend this one over Toy Story 5.
I think I related a little more to Toy Story 5. I think that one had more of an emotional connection. Although, if we're talking about summer movies in general, there are some great ones that premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. I don't think we can really group them into this one because general audiences haven't seen that. But 2026, it's definitely going to be a stacked year for animation, especially looking at what we have on the horizon. And yeah, it's a pretty good summer for animation overall, I think, too.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else is coming out. We have Wildwood coming out later this year. We have maybe Ray Gun. Do we have a release date for that one?
Yeah, it's coming out on December 18th. It's going up against Avengers Doomsday and Dune Part 3, so Doomsday, if you will. But for those who don't want to go to the theater that day, maybe wait, you can stay and watch Brad Bird's epic. And we also have Forgotten Island from DreamWorks coming out, which looks very promising. It's from the same team that did Puss in Boots: The Last Wish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good things coming out from a lot of studios, which will be exciting. So let us know your thoughts. Go to rotoscopers.com/371 and give us your review of Minions and Monsters and your rating. So Nick, before we let you go, any last thoughts, and where can we find you? What are you working on now?
Yeah, well, definitely go see it. It's a great film. And it deserves a much wider audience than it has, but I am glad that the people that have seen it are making it a financial success overall. And right now I'm working on my Emmy predictions for this year's Outstanding Animated Program race. And also I'm working on a video that's about why animation should be on the main Emmy telecast as opposed to the Creative Arts ceremony, especially this year, where I think it's going to be really relevant. And if you want to see that video, it'll come out in a few weeks. It's going to be on the Cartoon Contender YouTube page that you can check out. And for more updates on animation and awards, and to learn more about my books, Bright and Shiny, A History of Animation and Award Shows, you can check out my site, cartooncontender.com. And I'm on all socials as either Nick Spake or Cartoon Contender.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. And until next time, we are the Rotoscopers. Yeah, no nipples, apparently. Disney has a rule that was instituted in the past few years, I guess, where no mammals can have nipples, which I'm like, okay, Disney, here we're kind of losing the plot here. You've been listening to the Animation Addicts Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to help spread the word, be sure to share the podcast with your friends on social media. Just don't forget to tag us at Rotoscopers on Instagram and use the hashtag Animation Addicts. For all the links and full show notes for this episode, go to rotoscopers.com/podcast. Now, if you still can't get enough for your animation fix, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and visit rotoscopers.com for more animation news, reviews, and interviews. Thanks for listening.